Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Reading Party podcast with Megan and Lexi. This episode continues our season looking at stories set in the Roman Empire and its periphery. Some of the material includes themes of violence or sexual assault. It is not suitable for under 18s. We hope you have your favourite beverage and snacks ready to go, because we've got our teas and are ready to start spilling the tea on our latest ancient story. Hello everybody, welcome back to season 3 of the Reading Party podcast. This season is our Rome season, as I'm sure you're all aware because we've been doing it for a couple of weeks now. And today we are talking about The Last Legion, which is a 2007 kind of like fantasy historical adventure type movie with a very small romantic thread running through it. It has Rome, it has the last Roman emperor, it has the sword Excalibur and Merlin and King Arthur, and really it has everything you could possibly want for an historical fantasy adventure that crosses over into medieval Britain. So I enjoyed watching it. We both have thoughts. Before we do that, Lexi, hi, do you have tea today?
I do. So for our more eagle-eared, that doesn't really translate without the hawk vision or whatever. But okay, for our for our good listeners, they might be able to tell I sound a little stuffy, and it is because I am recovering from a sinus infection, the first one I've ever had in my life. So yeah, that's fun. So yes, I do have tea, and it is just your standard garden variety green tea because that is soothing.
That is an excellent plan. I'm also with green tea. I have green tea with jasmine. Because I'm on this kind of happens semi-annually. I realize that I'm drinking more black tea than water or other things. So I try to kind of wean myself away from drinking 5 cups of breakfast tea a day, which still isn't enough fluid intake. I am the worst at actually remembering to drink fluids. So I'm doing some green tea. Maybe later I will actually have a glass of water, which is deeply shocking. But then probably within 2 weeks, I'll have completely forgotten because ADHD does that to a brain, and I'll just be back to like mainlining black tea again. But today I have green tea with jasmine. It's very pleasant.
That sounds delicious. So I want to just start off and ask you, had you ever seen this movie before?
I had not. This was a first.
I honestly, going into this, would have said I've never seen it in my life. And then actually I started watching it and I had a vague memory of, wait, I've seen this before, but like a very, 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 very long time ago. And so like bigger plot points, they fell back into place as I was watching it. I was like, oh wait, and I think, yes. Oh my God, though. The difference between saying this now versus at least a decade ago. Wait, it can't be. Wait, no, it's 2024, 2000. Yes, 2007.
It came out in 2007.
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay, so yeah, so like at least a decade ago. Whoa. It should tell you how memorable this is that I didn't remember seeing it, which is kind of sad now.
So I don't normally read reviews either before or after we read and watch whatever it is we're reviewing on the show. But I did actually go and find a review just because I was curious about what kind of reception this had. And the review I read kind of described this as a really like gentle, child-friendly swashbuckling adventure that feels like it's actually from like the 80s. And it does.
Wait, who reviewed it? Was it Rotten Tomatoes or was it like an actual outlet?
No, it's on Sci-Fi.
Oh, okay.
So it wasn't like a critical review or anything.
Oh, fine. Who cares?
But the author described it as feeling like it came from the 80s maybe. And it really does. It feels a lot like The Adventures of Young Hercules or something along those lines. It's not as camp and it's not as comical, but it's got that same kind of predictability about it, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's definitely like there was no point where I felt like I didn't know where it was going. It was kind of going the path well trodden, which didn't really do it any favors. Okay. I mean, do you want to just briefly recap it for our friends who have not watched?
Absolutely.
Because I definitely have so many thoughts I want to get into, but really they need to know what we're talking about.
Absolutely. So we open with Colin Firth, obviously a much younger Colin Firth than some viewers may be used to, returning to Rome. He's an imperial soldier. He's been sent off somewhere. He's coming back because there's a new emperor being sworn in, crowned, initiated, crowned. Yeah, there is a crowning ceremony. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the right terminology is, but he's come back to see the new emperor and kind of pledge his allegiance, I guess. And there's a fantastic scene right at the beginning where they're camped out in the city of Rome. They've just arrived. His armor is kind of on display in this tent ready for him to put on for the ceremonies later. And this kid who you've seen kind of watching them process into Rome from the top of a giant statue, he sneaks into the tent and like unsheathes the sword to take a look at it. And I mean, the kid is Thomas Brodie Sangster, who's the kid from Love Actually that everyone will probably know. So he's the character around whom most of the plot revolves in this movie. But he's been watching these soldiers process in, and if you see his face on screen, he's going to be a main character, right? He's a recognized person. He's a pretty accomplished actor. So you know he's a major character. And then he gets caught by Colin Firth looking at this sword, accused of being a thief, and he's humiliated in front of all the men, and they threaten to cut off his hand. They don't. They throw him into a well. And I'm like, oh, this is the new emperor, isn't it? And he is absolutely the new emperor. And in the middle of this, there's this white-robed dude who strides through, chastises Colin Firth, and essentially says, like, humiliation is never a good way to teach children, which is true. And Colin Firth's like, philosophers. Sorry. Colin Firth and my father bear a striking resemblance to each other. And when Colin Firth does this kind of paternalistic, authoritarian type thing, it just is like my dad, who's not terribly authoritarian, but it triggers a weird like relationship in my brain. I'm like, sorry. Hopefully my father never listens to this. I love you, Dad. And this guy is in this white robe thing, and he has a very prominent Welsh accent. So you know from the get-go, he's not a Roman. He looks kind of druidish. And so I hadn't read anything about the movie before watching it. So this was the point at which I realized, is there an Arthur thing going on here? Do we have like a pagan druid guy? This is going to be interesting. So we kind of skip forward. Romulus Augustus, who is the kid, is crowned. Colin Firth sees him and is like, oh shit, I just had my centurion chuck the new emperor in a well. That was not a great move. But it doesn't really matter, because almost instantly a Germanic gentleman, whose name I am not going to be able to pronounce, Odoacer, comes and kind of overthrows everyone. Because, I mean, this is actually what happens in history. Odoacer comes and is credited or attributed with the fall of the Western Roman Empire. At least Romulus Augustus is deposed and taken off to a prison, a very nice island prison that, I mean, I wouldn't mind spending the rest of my years in. And history has him stay there. Like, he isn't killed or anything. He just kind of stays there and ages and presumably dies of old age. He kind of fades from the historical record a bit. The movie obviously does not do that, because that would be a really boring film. So what happens is Colin Firth plus mysterious swordsperson from the Eastern Empire go to rescue him. And you find out, as they're journeying on, that mysterious swordsperson is in fact a woman. Shock horror. She's a very, very accomplished swordswoman called Mira. And this is the beginning of the kind of very, very minor romantic subplot that we see throughout the movie. But they manage to rescue Romulus. They also rescue his tutor, who has been imprisoned with him. His name is Ambrosinus, maybe. I'm not good with Roman names. I think it's Ambrosinus. They rescue him, but in the midst of the rescue, Romulus finds this amazing sword that was once Julius Caesar's sword. And they make a big thing about Augustus being the direct descendant of Caesar. He wasn't. He was kind of a usurper, or his family kind of usurped the throne, the imperial throne. But in this movie, he's a direct descendant of Caesar. So the sword is his by birthright, and the sword is attached to this prophecy. And there's one edge for defense, one edge for, it's not attack, but it's kind of, that's the idea, made to fit the hand of he who would rule. That's the idea. So whoever has this sword is the ruler of what we don't know, where, no idea. But it was made in Britannia. So they go they meet a senator friend of Colin Firth's on the beach. The plan was to take the emperor back to the Eastern Empire, where he would kind of have sanctuary. And we find out that's not going to happen, actually, because the emperor of the Eastern Empire has decided that he doesn't really want to do that. And he is going to kind of throw his lot in with Odoacer. And the rest of the Senate has thrown their lot in with Odoacer. So actually, Romulus Augustus is persona non grata. No one really wants him to be emperor anymore except Colin Firth. So they are attacked because Colin Firth is like, no, I swore an oath to defend the empire and the Caesar and all this imperial nonsense. And the senator in question ends up like having his men attack, and there are Goths everywhere. And you know they're Goths, by the way, because they're wearing whole animal skins and have very long hair that hasn't seen a brush or a comb ever. That's how you can tell. So they're all attacked. They're all obviously killed by Colin Firth and Mira. Colin Firth also then kills the senator, who used to be a friend of his. And they all end up getting in a boat and going to Britannia. Well, they don't actually know. Sorry, they don't get in a boat. I thought they were going to get in a boat because to my mind, that just makes more sense. They don't. They go over the Alps, which is in ancient times probably a better way to do it. But they go over the Alps. They end up in Britannia. And Ambrosius, when he gets to the beach, kind of like face plants and is like, oh, my own Britannia. It's like, okay, yes, you're home. I understand that. I have yet to face plant in Heathrow when I arrive off the plane, but I do get that. And they journey because they're going to find the last legion. They're going to find the Legion of the Ninth, who's stationed somewhere in Britannia, we think, to try. And I was a bit unclear about exactly why they were doing that. It felt like they were trying to then take back the empire. What the hell they were going to do with one legion against the whole Western and Eastern empires, I am not entirely sure. But I think that was the idea. So they get there. They go to Hadrian's Wall. There is no one there. It is like ghost town deserted. And they're like, well, shit, what do we do now? Then a bunch of farmers come out of the woods and they're like, we're farmers. What are you doing here? Like, they're not farmers. This is the Ninth Legion. They've just gone native. And it is indeed the Ninth Legion. They have gone native. They've married local women. They have started farming and they're just kind of living quietly. And the big bad guy, Vortigern, who we find out Ambrosius has a history with. But the big bad guy, Vortigern, is kind of leaving the Ninth alone because they're not doing anything. He's burning other villages for reasons unknown. A bit of a tyrant. Don't know what's going on there. But he's a bad guy. You know he's a bad guy because he has a giant golden mask on. He doesn't like show his face. He's just this golden mask with long greying hair. Anyway, Colin Firth and company go back to the village with the Ninth. And they're like, we farm now. Rome abandoned us, so we're just going to farm. Anyway, one of the Goths who was following them to try and get Caesar back tells Vortigern what's going on. Vortigern's like, oh, the sword, because it turns out that he tried to get the sword from Ambrosius ages ago. Why, we don't know, because Ambrosius A, didn't have the sword, and B, didn't know where it was. He's listed in all of the blurb as like the guardian of the sword. How he's a guardian when he doesn't know where it is a mystery to me. But anyway, he's a sword guardian. So Vortigern is after this sword. He says, you can have the kid, just give me the sword and the old man. So Vortigern goes, he almost kidnaps a small child, sends her back as a messenger, and ends up killing 3 other people instead. Very delightful. And there's a minorly tense moment when we think that maybe the Ninth will just turn Caesar over to Vortigern, but they don't. Colin Firth makes a big rousing speech and says, we leave at dawn. Anyone who wants to come with us, you join us as brothers, and we leave the rest of you behind as brothers also. I was like, very nice. That was very egalitarian of you. Thank you. Anyway, they all go to Hadrian's Wall. A bunch of the Ninth follow them. There's a big battle. Then when it looks like everything is going to fall apart and they're all going to die, the rest of the Ninth appear over the hill. And there's like 1,000 Romans. Where they were, because they did not appear to be in this tiny village, I don't know. But they all turn up and they attack the Angles. I think it's the Angles. They attack them. They defeat them. In the middle of this, Ambrosius kills Vortigern, takes off his mask, which for some reason is bloody. Is it like stuck to his face? I don't know. It was a bit gross. But he takes off the mask, rides to the hilltop, and essentially says, look, Vortigern's dead. All of the bad guys turn and run. And there's a minor problem because one of the Goth bad guys who's a massive scar across his face, he's been chasing everybody everywhere. He finds Colin Firth. Well, he's trying to get Caesar, but Colin Firth rides his horse and he was like, rah, no. And they have this big fight and Colin Firth nearly dies, but then Caesar picks up the sword and stabs the Goth guy. And then Mira comes over and is like, Colin Firth. She doesn't call him Colin Firth. Obviously, his name is Aurelius, but I like Colin Firth better. It just rolls off my tongue. So she grabs Colin Firth. She's like, no, Colin Firth, don't die. And Caesar's like, you swore an oath to protect me. And Colin Firth says, to the last breath. And Romulus says, have I discharged you of that oath? I'm like, the boy makes a good point. I mean, you have not been left, sir. You have not been given leave to go. So you must now come back from the brink of death and stay. And he does. It's very nice. He comes back from the brink of death. Everyone just decides to stay in Britannia. They don't go back to Rome or anything and try and return the Roman Empire to its former glory. And you find out from Ambrosinius, who it turns out, big surprise, is in fact Merlin. You find out from him that, in fact, Colin Firth and Mira get married. No one is surprised by this. They adopt Romulus. They raise him as their own son. He is then Uther Pendragon. And the kid that all is being narrated to as a story is Arthur. And Arthur's like, oh, Merlin, that's just an old story. And Merlin says, have I ever lied to you, Arthur? And Arthur says, every day. And Merlin's like, you make a good point. And then the movie kind of ends. And Excalibur, the sword, ends up in a stone because Romulus like chucks it at the end of the battle. And despite being an 11-year-old child, he manages to throw it quite high in the air. And it comes down point first and gets embedded in a rock. And the inscription that was on the face kind of fades off and leaves just the letters necessary for Excalibur. So this is how Excalibur happened. This is how the whole Arthur thing got its start. Yeah, I've obviously left bits out because it's an hour and 45-minute film, and I think I did that in about 10 minutes. But it was fun. It was an enjoyable romp through history. It doesn't pretend to be historically accurate. It isn't obviously historically accurate, but it was quite delightful. Did I miss anything crucial, Lexi?
Not really. No, you got it. You got it.
Excellent.
You know, the thing that first caught my attention, though, was that they assembled like an all-star cast. Actually, for any Game of Thrones fans, most of the people in this film were in Game of Thrones. Like, it's a smorgasbord of famous or up-and-coming at that time actors who were later in a lot of stuff. And so I thought, you know, with this cast, it can't possibly be bad, right? Well, oh boy.
I have to say the acting was actually really good.
Yes, that's the thing. I was like, so
with what they were given, they did a very good job. The plot's just, I mean, it's hilarious and the script is a little odd.
I mean, you can't. I mean, Colin Firth gave it such a great try. It was actually, that's the thing. It's really well acted from this seasoned cast. The problem is if you have a bad script, it's stunted, it's weird. Colin really gave it the old college try. I mean, he really desperately tried to save it, but there's some things you just can't save. And so I felt that he really couldn't save it. Now, it was funny though, because the whole time that once I started watching and I sort of started to remember, I said, oh yes, this is the fun one. Like there's a whole trend of ancient Roman films that are all kind of 2-for-1s, right? It's like you get the late Roman and sort of medieval Arthurian Britain, because that seems to be a really popular trend with Fall of Rome stuff. And so it was very funny because I was like, wow, this film is like Sword in the Stone meets Fall of the Roman Empire, kind of, which is like,
it really is
a weird ass. But you know what? It's so historically inaccurate that it's kind of awesome. It's kind of funny, right? Because I'm just like, look, when I think of Colin Firth, I think of like my favorite role of his, to be quite honest. And I know people are going to be like, he was Mr. Darcy. That has to be your favorite, right? And I'm like, no, I actually loved him in The King's Speech. But it was like a really serious.
He was so good in King's Speech. So good.
But like, it was a serious role for a seasoned actor. So that's what I associate him. So the fact that I'm like, he's trying to portray some like hard-bitten, swaggery Roman soldier. I'm like, what could go wrong? But also, I want to point out that Aishwarya Rai, or I guess her married name is Bakchan, who plays Mira, she's like Bollywood royalty, right? She's like the most...
I know. I went and looked up every actor afterwards because there were a couple of like faces I recognize, but I'm not always great at remembering where I've seen them. And I read her profile. I was like, holy shit, she's like an A-list celebrity. What is she doing here?
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. I know her from the Indian period film Jodha Akbar, which is a lot further forward in time, but she plays Akbar, the favorite wife, Joda. Great film. We can review that later because we should. It's historical. Anyway, yeah, so she was in there and I was like, oh, she's going to just be a kick-ass Byzantine warrior woman and we're okay with this because anything with Eastern Roman Empire, great. The tropes are hilarious. You know, the whole Romulus, the last Western emperor, obviously must grow up to become Uther Pendragon with Julius Caesar's like magic sword because obviously that's what must happen. But here's the thing. Considering all the historical inaccuracies that we could get into, I found myself actually being really impressed that they got Romulus's name right. Odoacer, the Goth king, that's historically correct. It's a real person. And the thing is, I mean, they call him Vortigern in the film as the sort of Britain leader, but it's basically right? Because it's modeled after Vortigern, who was this, I mean, I guess he's a takeoff on a 5th century warlord. I mean, this dude's existence is kind of a mixture between sort of fact and fiction, and he kind of shows up and no one kind of really knows what that's about. But I mean, they got his name right, so I was really impressed. I mean, I would say those were the things that I was like, oh my God, yes, amazing. And then even though you're like, it starts out so promisingly with the correct names that I'm noticing. I mean, right off the bat, I mean, you didn't have to name the Goth king who shows up, 10 minutes into the movie or just about. You didn't have to give him the right name, but okay, I'm like, okay, so you have Odoacer's, right? But then you get into the what's wrong here. Well, the dates, right? So Romulus Augustus or whatever his name is, he was not crowned or deposed in 460, which is when they tell us the film takes place. The thing that makes me laugh is that the Ninth Legion historically predates 460 by about just a small, tiny 300 years. So I was like, okay.
Well, I mean, that's why they're lost. That's why they've gone native, because they've been there for 300 years. Apparently, they're also immortal.
Sure. So they're 300 years old, but also the Western Roman Empire fell, let's just call it slightly later, like a lot later, but sure. Who needs dates though? When you have Colin Firth and Aishwarya Rai kicking some goth ass, right? Like, woo! So I was like, okay, that's great. Other things I noticed, there probably weren't giant stone pieces of statuary just like randomly lying all around Italy, but also I find it kind of odd that they make this distinction between the East and the Western Roman Empire, and well, the capital of the Western Roman Empire was not Rome. It was Ravenna. So I was like, this is an odd flex, but sure, why not? And then I really couldn't get over the fact that they seemed to be inventing weapons, right? So
I did notice that one, yeah.
Yeah, so when Colin Firth and Aishwarya's characters are going to try to rescue Romulus, he like invents the automatic crossbow. I don't know what else I'd call it, but okay. And I seriously doubt that anyone in Britain was making magical swords for Julius Caesar out of fallen meteorites, but we'll go with it. Also, the prison, the castle in Capri, I think, where they were, that was a very late-looking medieval castle or some sort of fortress. So I was like, I'm not sure that's historically correct, but I do know that Hadrian's Wall, when we see it, that definitely looks late medieval. So I'm not entirely sure why that's there. Very out of place. And also, I mean, just let's be real. People in Britain, besides Vortigern's people, there weren't other people. I mean, if you look at the sort of fact and fiction of Vortigern, you're kind of like, okay, well, he was kind of the only dude in town because he'd conquered anything else. So there wasn't really anything outside of that. It's weird. I mean, you got to get into like Arthurian legend. And I'm like, why? This is a Roman thing, but it's really not because it's both. So it's weird. But I mean, look, the armor, the weapons, the clothing, let's just call them like a parody of Rome. It kind of felt like when you go into a Halloween store and look for the Roman section and say, I want to be a Roman legionary. Point me to what bad leather things I can put on and inaccurate things. And yeah, I was like, okay, well, look, the whole thing was kind of convoluted, but also I want to be very clear. I know I'm making this movie sound absolutely horrible, but it's not. Okay, it's really not, because there are some really great funny moments and some of the actors sell it really great. I mean, okay, John Hannah, he's always typecast as like the slimy Roman politician-y type. Here he's a senator. Fans of Spartacus will know he's Batiatus, the dude who owns Spartacus. And
he's the brother in the Mummy movies as well.
He's the brother in the Mummy movies. And I'm pretty sure, I think he might have also been in Game of Thrones too. I think. I don't know. He was in a lot. Either way, it's very funny to see him just taken advantage of. And again, funny casting choice that I found hilarious was that Odoacer's commanding officer, Wolfia, was Kevin McKidd. And I find that hilarious because Kevin McKidd was freaking Lucius Vorenus from HBO Rome. Okay, so this is not a newbie. This is a seasoned actor who knows how to do Rome and how to do it well. So he must have just been having a ball being like, this is so inaccurate. I mean, God, I don't know. And then the last thing I'll say, I guess, is also the romance was actually quite muted for a silly romp. I mean, I guess it's supposed to be really more of a slashy legionary adventure tale, but I thought it was a little interesting. But it didn't actually bother me in the end, only because Colin Firth and Aishwarya, as lovely people as I'm sure they are, they really had zero romantic chemistry. I found it to be quite wooden. And so the fact that they take the sort of, she acts really well with her eyes. So the fact that all they needed to do was pin it on her eyes looking at him, I was like, yeah, you know what? That sells it just fine. Just don't talk. I
buy this.
Yeah, I was like, the dialogue is actually not doing you any favors. So just stick with this. And it was fine. I felt a little cheated because we didn't even get a kiss, but we do know they slept together, but still, we didn't even get an on-screen kiss. So I was like, really? Yeah, no wonder this is muted. But, this is not the kind of film you watch when you want a romance story, because it's a swashbuckling, historically inaccurate, ridiculous thing that puts in snippets of real history, but also is just a big nod to you love Arthurian legend, and because it's popularly mixed together with one of the many falls of Rome, sure, let's put it together. But I was entertained, so I don't want to say it was all bad. So those are my thoughts for accuracy, inaccuracy, hilarity, actor things. What about you, Megan?
So because it's been so long since I did anything Roman, and it was never really my focus academically anyway, this season can kind of skate by the historical stuff without actually realizing it's a problem, because I just don't recognize it. I don't know enough to realize if it's wrong. Some things seem a little obvious, like the crossbow thing. Weird mechanical crossbow in no, why we have perfectly good compound recurve bows? Why are we inventing some bizarre mechanical contraption? They use it to shoot a grappling hook up a wall. It seems a little bit excessive, but unless it's ridiculously obvious like that, I'm really not going to notice. It's not going to be a thing that trips me. And the things that irritated me, honestly, the love story felt contrived and unnecessary. At the end, you kind of see how it is necessary, because they really want to give Romulus this loving parental, family unit thing. And throughout the movie, you get little snapshots of Mira being all maternal, and Romulus takes her hand at one point, and then when he lets her go, she kind of stops and stares at her hand like no one has ever held it before, which is possible. It just felt very, I'm going to sound so woke, it felt really heteronormative to have the only woman, the only main character who is a woman, be cast in this maternal role, when everything else about her identity is how much of a warrior she is. When we first meet her, she's not only kicking ass and taking names, she tells Colin Firth that by the time she was 14, she had reached the highest point of her training. And she's amazing. She does such a great job. I've not actually seen Aishwarya Rai before, but she did a wonderful job with that character. And I felt like having this maternal thing imposed on her for no other reason than she's the only available woman felt really bizarre. And I think she would have been a stronger character. I think the movie would not have suffered from her not being a romantic love interest. She can just be Romulus's head of security or chief bodyguard or something. And Colin Firth can settle down with a nice Celtic woman. Like, Britain is full of women. I'm sure there's someone there who would marry Colin Firth. I probably know several of them. Like, we don't have to shoehorn the only main character, the only female main character, into this role of wife and mother. Again, especially when everything else about her character is not in the least bit maternal. Like, during the battle, she's given the job of babysitting Romulus. She's your best fighter. Why is she playing babysitter? It's like, send her out to assassinate someone. She could kill Vortigern. That would have been a lot more realistic than having fucking Merlin go out and beat him about the head with a flaming wooden staff. Like, I know those two have beef from, like, past lives, but it just, yeah. So, as you may have noticed, that made me a little bit irate. That was frustrating. And the other thing that, again, really bothered me and seems like a bizarre choice, the only black character, the only black actor, Nonso Anozie, who is also in Game of Thrones, and I know from the Netflix Sweet Tooth adaptation, fantastic actor, does a really great job here. He's really great. I've said really great twice, 3 times now. He's fantastic, but he is the only, he's one of 2 from the original cohort of Colin Firth's fighters to die. The first one dies before they even leave Italy, and that is Owen Teale, who is, again, like a really familiar face to a lot of people. He's in Doctor Who, Doctor Who 1985, Discovery of Witches. He's also in Game of Thrones. I feel like the Game of Thrones casting agent just went through this movie and was like, well, have you, and you, and you, and you. But again, fantastic actor, really long, fantastic, illustrious career. So he dies first. He dies protecting Romulus, as a good Roman legionary would. But then the only other of the main legionary characters to die is also the only black actor. And I don't know if I'm just making too much of this. I don't know if I'm just like being weird about it, but it was a strange choice, given that, did he specifically need to die? He's out there protecting his friend's out there protecting him. Like, it felt a little uncomfortable and bizarre. But the rest of it, I actually really enjoyed. It was an hilarious romp through, purported history, this delightful fictionalized version of the end of the Roman Empire and the beginning of the Arthurian legends. Who knows? I enjoyed it. I did think it was a lot of fun.
Okay, yeah. I mean, look, I didn't really like Rome. Longtime listeners know this. I didn't really enjoy taking classes, so I tried to avoid as much. But so, yeah, I'm not as familiar, obviously, as some of the other parts of history. But yeah, I noticed enough. And it helps that right now I'm on this big kick and I'm reading through several books on the Eastern Roman Empire. So kind of the split between East and West. I just finished this great new Justinian biography. And so luckily, we're hitting this point right when I'm like, I know roughly the dates of what's happening. There was a whole chapter on basically the great battles in the Western Roman Empire that the emperors in Constantinople were looking at. And so I was reading about, the Goths, the Visigoths, all these things that were happening in Rome and Ravenna and all the sackings and stuff. And so I guess maybe because it's fresh, like some of these dates are rolling around in my brain. And so, as I'm watching, I have to just quickly Google and confirm, like, I think this is this and this is. So, that helps. So I had to kind of disconnect if I wanted to enjoy it at all, because I know the dates were just like, my brain hurts. So instead, I chose to focus on the portrayal of Vortigern because, I'm a sucker. I like Arthurian legend. So I was kind of like,
actually. I really love it.
Right. So I was kind of like, okay, let's look at how they portray him here. And then let's look at maybe other portrayals or whatever other things people have said. So here, he's clearly evil. They have the pentagram on him. And I was like, okay, fine. You need it for plot points. I get it. Now, the thing that I found the most funny, because there's no real historical sources I could find that talk about him wearing a mask. So my only impression was, dude, he's walking around in like a V for Vendetta Halloween mask, okay, trying to look terrifying. And I was like, that is a look. So he's all acting evil, but because he looks so ridiculous, I was just like, really? Like, really?
You really can't take him seriously.
No, you can't. There's no scenario in which I can. Now, I was trying to remember, okay, what was going on in the 5th century. I mean, again, he's so hard to look up because he's half legend, half real person. But historically, from what I remember, I think he was the one who invited the Saxons over to Britain because he was native born Britain. So he was beginning the trend of the Anglo-Saxons, as we call them, but he was but I believe his conflict was to stop incursions of the Picts, right? So he was fighting the North because that's where the Picts were, the native Scots, whatever. And so I was like, to have him fighting the Romans is a curious choice, I guess, because if he is purported to have been instrumental to the Saxon migration to Britain, that would clearly tell me that he's pro some sort of migration, because to me, he's willing to use other historical peoples who are powerful to defeat the main enemy, which would be North. So it's farcical that he's coming from the North because they make him come from above Hadrian's Wall, which implies he's a Pict. So I was just like, that whole part, it just destroyed my brain. And okay, I guess I could sort of get behind that, but not really. I mean, that was just, I think, the funniest part of all. And I would say, I don't normally see Vortigern brought to screen very often, but the one notable instance that I did, like when I grew up, was I'd watch the BBC 2-part fantasy film, let's call it Merlin, where it's like the backstory of Merlin. And that Vortigern, they get a bit more right, sort of, although they portray him just as a very cruel, evil person who needs to be taken down. So it's just really interesting to see sort of the different portrayals of this. Yeah, I mean, I guess, I forgive them a little more because historical fact really sort of helps us in one regard, but not really in others, because he is kind of a hard figure to track historically. So, I'm always like, okay, I'll be a bit more lenient if you're going to bring Vortigern in. But yeah, the whole like V for Vendetta Halloween mask just turns him into like a caricature of what was at one point a real person who we just really don't know too much about. So I was just like, man, he is not a Pict. Please, let's not talk about him being some droidic, weird person from the North. But, they went there. I'm like, well, good on you. You picked a real person, but you could have picked a real person just at a different time. Like, I don't know, man. And I kind of feel cheated because yes, I know it's popular to go to Rome because that's, Roman Empire. But I'm also just like, we know what Ravenna looked like. We have a lot of evidence. We have gorgeous mosaics that survived from like Theodoric's time. And, some of the historical Goth rulers actually contributed to the vibrant culture there. And here they were just dumbed down to be like savage brutes, I guess. So I was a little disappointed because I think it would have been an opportunity, at least sneak another nugget of history in there and show us Ravenna, man. I mean, Rome wasn't the capital. I mean, seriously. So there were a few things, yeah.
I think the problem is if you're making a movie about Rome with an emperor, the general public, the people who are going to watch this are not, because this, let's be honest, this is not drawing an audience of historians. That's not.
No, but you can teach people, because how many stupid films, like, the thing is, I think people won't care at the end of the day if you give them like a good story, a good film. Like, again, how many times do people set, like, okay, the Clash of the Titans 2010, they set it in Argos. How easy would it have been to just cheat and be like, let's just put it in Athens because that's what people know. But they don't, because you craft a story, you show people a city, you can put whatever name on it, but as soon as you get into the story, people won't care. They'll be like, okay, they're from here, So on one hand, I know what you're going for, but also I think that because if you're not going for an explicitly historical thing, I think you could take the time to at least introduce people to the concept of, hey, there are different cities, there are different places. And so if you want to have a funny, swashbuckling sort of 80s swaggery thing, the least you could do, in my opinion, is be like, let's just set it in Ravenna. So if people are going to remember anything about this movie, it's that, hey, there was Colin Firth and Aishwarya in Ravenna.
It would have been nice. I do definitely see where you're coming from. I think for me, the Argos thing is maybe more obscure than Rome as a concept. I think people are possibly more willing to go with what is unfamiliar if the story is already new-ish to them. I feel like Rome is such a weirdly present entity in a lot of Western culture, and like people know what Rome is, they know what the Roman Empire is, and if you tell them this is a movie about the Roman Empire, but we don't actually do anything in Rome, we have a different capital city, they're going to get pissy about it. Especially if it's not like if this was a whole series set in the appropriate time about the last days of the Roman Empire, absolutely, yes, 100%. Use the appropriate locations, use better costuming, use more accurate dates and people, because I think a series gives you a lot more room to navigate that and to explain it. I think in a movie that is only an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes long, with the very small minority taking place actually in the Italian peninsula, I don't think there would have been enough time or space to really kind of bring the audience along on an explanation for why they are not actually in Rome.
I guess. But if they wanted to really simplify it, why then even have Eastern Roman Empire, Western Roman Empire?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because I'm like, if you're just going to be like, it's a Roman flick, then just have Rome be together.
Because if you don't use the Eastern Empire, you can't have this random exotic Indian woman being the best swordsperson in the whole entire world.
Just have her come from Damascus. Just be like, hey, Syria was a thing here. We don't need it to be Constantinople. Or you know what? If the Eastern Roman Empire in, 460 or whenever they set the film, I'm like, look, then acknowledge who else is active in the region while this is happening. And I was trying to piece it together. Okay, 460, I was like, so I believe the Eastern Roman Empire at this time, it was either when Justin the one was already emperor, or he was about to ascend the throne after Anastasius. But either way, so I'm assuming, if Justin won, who is probably most famous just for being the adopted father of Justinian, okay, fine. Like, say Justin's on the throne. He's still fighting with what's Curso's dad's name? Is it just Curso one? Okay. You got the Sasanian Empire already there doing stuff. So I'm like, just make her come from the Sasanian Empire. You have stuff in the East. You don't need to make it Constantinople. I mean, really, if we're going to not even make it historically accurate, then definitely be like, she is from the Sasanian Empire, because, man, the Sasanian Empire basically covered the entire Persian plateau. I mean, they essentially were from the border of the Middle East as we know it today, sometime, basically bordering Iraq, and the Eastern Roman Empire kind of covered sort of Israel up into Lebanon. Like they essentially had Syria, some of Syria. So I'm kind of like, if your border is somewhere there, I don't remember exactly where the dividing lines at those dates were, but like you have a sliver of the Middle East, but then you have the Persian Empire, and it stretches basically to India. And Mira literally was like, I am an Indian warrior and I come from blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, so she already says she's coming from India. And I'm like, well, India was basically covered by the Sasanian Empire. So just make it that. And then if you want to do Rome, just have Rome be Rome. I'm sorry. I'm just like, no, absolutely not. But if they were going to do that, I do understand that, like, then they would have to make it 460 BC rather than AD, because that would be the most plausible thing for there not being East and West Rome. Because, I mean, I suppose if we're really thinking about it, then I'm like, okay, well, I guess we want to be technically correct. The empire wasn't really ruled by 4 people, 2 emperors and 2 deputies, split into an actual East and West split until about Diocletian. So that's later in time. Okay, so I'm like, make it 460 BC. Then I'm happy. Then you can be in Rome. Then it can fall. Okay, then the Sasanians, maybe not so much. But you can make it Achaemenid. Work with me here. Work with me, man. I don't know. Some things I can't get over. I'm sorry. This is when the history nerd comes out. And then I start trying to justify actual plot or historical points that you can center yourself around. And that I know. If you just want a fun romp where you're not overthinking the way I'm desperately trying to do, just watch it and turn off your brain, okay?
Would you watch it again?
Oh, absolutely. Because it's the kind of the dumb thing where, like, here's the thing. I will say I would absolutely watch it again for no other reason than the action sequences are hysterical, because why not? I mean, Aishwarya is like fighting all of the Goth warriors on Capri, and these like legionary men are just like
by herself, by the way, while the legionaries just kind of stare.
Yes, they gather, and then they're like so impressed. They're so impressed. They're like, oh, this is sexy. Let's just like watch her as she's fighting all of these men. And I'm like, you could help. So the action sequences are actually quite hysterical. There are some clever bits, but no, I would watch it again because it's funny. And it's funny in a way that, guess what? King Arthur is not funny. That is way too serious for its own good. Robin Hood or Gladiator, not funny. Really serious. They like bring the mood down if you want to be sad. And so to me, this is a film where I'm like, look, the key is if you go in knowing it's going to be awful, which they probably did when they were making this, then lean into the awfulness and then just kind of throw caution to the wind and say, what the hell? And that's what they did. And so it's a little stilted. The dialogue, chemistry for some of the actors isn't great, but you know what? It's a great cast of seasoned actors. You see them in other places. I just realized actually that there's more Game of Thrones people than I thought, because Ian Glenn, who played his father, Orestes, that was Jorah Mormont. You know, it is Daenerys's like bestie dude who's in love with her. So he's in there. And then the African-American dude, oh God, what was his name?
Not so nosy, but on Game of Thrones, I don't remember who he was.
Oh my God. That actor, though, is, oh God, what was his name?
Zara Zohan?
Yes, Zara Zohan. He literally was the dude from Karth from Game of Thrones. And like, I didn't recognize him for the longest time. So I was like halfway through and I was like, oh my God, you are the dude from Karth. So I was just like, it is a smorgasbord of people who act in all these great things. And then you even get the little like, well, it's not even subtle. It's a very blatant nod to Lord of the Rings when you have that scene of the group crossing the Alps. It's like that shot from Lord of the Rings. So like, it's got some fun little nuggets in it. And the whole cast is great. And yeah, the kid who plays Romulus, he's in a lot of things. And then I realized he was Peter Pan in Once Upon a Time, which is awesome to see. And he actually also was in Game of Thrones as well. So it's insane. So yeah, look, great actors just doing their best, and it's fun. So I would watch it again. What about you, Megan?
I would actually. And it has, the feel of it is similar to me for Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, which is by far and away a better movie, but it has a very similar feel to it. It's the same kind of style. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was funny and an easy watch, honestly. Like, you're right, it's not serious, but it doesn't try to take itself seriously either, which is something that I think a lot of historically based films struggle a little bit with. There's a kind of a feeling that, oh, we're doing history, we must be serious. It's like, well, I mean, no, history is just people doing people things, and sometimes it's a bit ridiculous, and it's okay for it to be a bit ridiculous. So I enjoyed that kind of lighthearted nature that went along with it. And it's honestly rarely for an historical movie. It's one I could probably watch with my kids. There is minimal blood. It has a very happy ending. And I think it would just be fun. Yeah, I probably will watch it again.
The one thing I wanted to ask you as a Brit, really, is, how do you feel about the combining, because it is, again, a popular thing of like the end of Roman history and all these legends and combining it with like British history?
It's tricky. And I don't really appreciate the implication that the native Britons were somehow lesser than the Romans who came and settled, that somehow a native Briton could not have been Pendragon or Arthur. And like, I know Pendragon and Arthur are mythological characters, they're literary inventions, absolutely fine with that. But the idea that one of the most famous mythological figures from Britain has to be somehow Roman to be worthy of holding Excalibur is just a little insulting, if we're very honest. So I'm not wildly thrilled about that. But honestly, I don't know an awful lot about that period in British history. It's not something I've ever really researched. It's not really covered it's covered a little bit in schools, but like elementary school level, I don't remember it very well. So it doesn't bother me in that respect. But the assumption that Rome is somehow superior to all of the little tribes and clans and stuff populating Britannia, but also the rest of Europe. Odoacer is like depicted as this horrible barbarian. And maybe he was, I don't know. But it bothers me that there's this sharp contrast between like Rome as civilization and everyone else is just like people living in huts wearing animal pelts. Like actually there's a very wide variety of cultures going on there. And maybe we could have a movie that explores them instead of focusing on the superiority of Rome.
Yeah, this is something that I always kind of am interested in, knowing and asking. And I don't know why it's taken me so long because I have British friends. I guess I could have asked about yeah, I know Britain's got a pretty bad reputation for like stealing other people's culture and shit. And so it's not popular to, I guess, ask what happens when people actually are appropriating your own culture. I know it's very like unpopular since let's rag on the Brits for stealing other people's shit. But like, it is something that I've always been interested in. But it also seems like in conversations I've had, like it's a very contentious thing, even within Britain, right? Because like everyone wants to claim King Arthur. Everyone loves Arthurian legend because it is like one of the mythological things that Brits have going for them. But from sort of history and mythology together, I think most stories now, they say, he was Welsh, right? He was a Welsh hero, and a lot of English kings kind of took that legacy and ran with it, which in itself is interesting. But I'm trying to think. You're from Aylesbury, right? And I know I'm using like the very ancient name because I'm sure it's not called that today. I've been watching a lot of The Last Kingdom, and it's called Aylesbury because that's what it was during that time period. So I'm very sorry, Megan, that I'm probably saying the name wrong. But yeah, Aylesbury. So, okay, I'm not going to say it's close, quote unquote, because it's not. Like Birmingham is closer where you did schooling. But essentially, like you're closer to Wales than other parts of the UK, let's just say, right?
Yeah. So the modern town is called Aylesbury, and it's about an hour north of London. But yeah, it's southern-ish.
Closer, though.
England. Yeah, definitely closer to Wales than to Scotland or Northern Ireland.
Yeah. So I don't know, just coming from that region, I mean, because like historically, right, that was like the capital of Mercia when it was still Mercia and not England. So I'm not a scholar of this time period, but I am a very avid enthusiast of anything that has to do with like Anglo-Saxon or even pre-Anglo-Saxon Britain. And I love these myths and legends and sort of the 9th century Viking raids and stuff. So I would say I would like to think that I'm a little more knowledgeable than just like the casual viewer. So I do notice things. And so it's just interesting when you said, that they don't really teach you too much about this stuff. Cause I'm like, well, historically though, like I feel like the region of Mercia would have had a little closer ties to the Welsh.
So the curriculum in the UK is set nationally. So we don't have the kind of regional curriculum that you see in the States. We don't have a county by county curriculum. It's all, you go to primary school and you cover these topics, and how you cover them obviously is up generally to the teacher, but there are things that you cover.
Okay.
And it'll be this, like, what I would have covered as a primary school student in my part of the country would be the same as someone in Wales, in like Northern England. There is some variation. I believe Wales has Welsh language offered. There are at least some Welsh language schools. So I don't know how different that is in terms of curriculum, but generally speaking, you cover the same stuff.
Ah, okay. Yeah, a good friend of mine grew up like right on the border, basically, between the two. And she said that she had mandatory Welsh, which was interesting. But from conversations, it doesn't seem like they were teaching her like vastly different things. She just had to tack on an extra language, which by her own admission, she said she was rubbish at it. But I was like, oh, that's fun. So yeah, I don't know. I was just kind of curious about that. But I think you were too far, right? You didn't have different language requirement.
Yeah, no, it would have been odd for me to have that.
Oh, well, anyway, I'm sure we can get other people musing, hopefully, about the sort of weird appropriation of Arthurian legend and Roman and mixing them and doing weird things, because I just wanted to start this conversation that I'm sure we'll come back to, just because I know that we're doing other adaptations this season that, you know, when looking for Rome films on the internet, like a lot of them end up going to Britain or some kind of, you know, Roman Britain. And I think it's going to be kind of inescapable to not at least start to mention, like, this is a trend. We see it a lot. This is kind of weird. Why did they do that? Like, why can't we just have, you know, there's so many different things set in Greece that don't need to go anywhere else. It's just, you know, let Greece be Greece. So I don't know why we can't let Rome be Rome. So it's just a curious mixing of Britain and Roman history, mythology. So just wanted to point that out, and I'm sure we'll come back to it, especially since half of the other half of the hosting team is British.
Absolutely. No, it was a weird mix. It was interesting, but a little odd. And we should end there because we're about at an hour, but we will see you all next week. Thank you very much for spending some time with us. I hope you enjoyed it. Definitely see this film if you haven't. It's fun. It's enjoyable. It's a little ridiculous, but we both liked it.
Okay. Sounds good. We will see you next week.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave us a review, and you can also follow us on social media at The Reading Party Podcast. If you'd like to leave us a book or movie suggestion, then email us at thereadingpartypod@gmail.com. See you next week.